As you build more and more flows, you'll probably start to notice a pattern. Many processes require the same source data that needs to be cleaned and normalized very similarly every single time. Now, as you work across more and more flows and you have more teammates actually building, there starts to be a real cost to constantly rebuilding these integrations and rebuilding and maintaining these data cleanup steps every single time. There's also a real risk that different teammates are pulling and cleaning this data differently across different flows. This is where parabola tables come in, and in this video, I'm going to highlight how the best teams are leveraging parabola tables to share and normalize the way that they're pulling data across flows and teammates. At the most basic level, a parabola table is a place for you to store the data that's being processed by a parabola flow. Now, within a specific flow, you can output more than one table, which is often the case. You combine data from a few different sources, and then maybe you have tables at different levels of granularity. One might be at a line item level, another might be a rolled up view of that same data. Now, you have the ability to pass data between flows using parabola tables, but you do have the ability to control whether you'd like that data in a lockdown table, that is just storing that data as it comes in, or you can choose to actually share that data with other flows and allow teammates to pull from the tables that you're creating. This allows you to create a true ingestion engine in a workflow that determines how data is being pulled, cleaned, combined, transformed, and ultimately stored for downstream processes. Now let's walk through an example of an ingestion flow that is populating a parabola table, and then we'll talk about the downstream flows that are pulling from that same table. In this example, we are receiving an email with an invoice, and we want to parse that invoice and add those records to the bottom of our parabola table. We're first processing that invoice, cleaning, combining, transforming that data, and then ultimately we're sending it off to a parabola table so that we can see at a line item level all of our invoice lines. From there are a variety of downstream flows that can leverage that clean, consolidated data that we just put together. We might have one flow that is doing some kind of landed cost analysis, pulling from that invoice data. We have another flow that's auditing the line items to make sure that what we have been billed is actually accurate. And then we could have a third flow that is scorecarding all of our carriers based on that invoice data. All three of these flows rely on that same clean invoice data, but none of these workflows require rebuilding that whole ingestion engine. And that's the real leverage you get from this type of architecture. Having one central flow for ingesting data ultimately drives consistency in the way that people are accessing data and eliminates risk that people are making mistakes when they're pulling that data or cleaning, combining, and transforming it. This approach is really useful when you have multiple downstream processes that are all pulling from the same source data, and also in situations where you might want to abstract away some of the complexity of pulling data from that integration and then doing all the downstream work to clean and normalize that data. It's also useful when you want to share access to data sets, but maybe not the full integration, even if you already have roles and permissions already set up. I'll end with a pro tip, and that is to make sure that you've established best practices for how you're going to name your tables in Parabola. This will make it really easy for both you and your teammates to find the right data in the right place at the right time. Now that you have a strong understanding of tables and when to use them, I'll bring you behind the curtain and show you one of Parabola's most impactful internal flows, our Salesforce reporting flow. The problem that we were facing is frequently when we would build internal flows that pulled from Salesforce, we found ourselves rebuilding the same cleanup steps and joins across things like accounts and contacts, and we were making so many API calls that it was starting to push up on our limit for Salesforce. Instead of making all of those API calls, we wanted to have one flow that was our central ingestion engine for pulling data from Salesforce, cleaning it, joining it, and then creating all of the different tables that we would need for downstream processes. In this flow, you can see a whole bunch of Salesforce integrations, logic, and send to parabola table steps. Across the flow, you can see that we're pulling different objects from Salesforce. We're doing some things to clean our data, to populate different tables, to join data, and ultimately what we're left with is a ton of very clearly named parabola tables that then make it really quick and easy for us to pull the relevant Salesforce data in any of our downstream processes. With a good understanding around tables, now you're ready to learn about one of the most powerful concepts in Parabola, which is flow orchestration.